Venus and Jupiter are known as astrology's benefics, the bringers of love, luck, and abundance. But what if I told you that these planets can also be the bringers of some of life's biggest pitfalls? We tend to think that Venus and Jupiter are only the planets that bless us, while the malefics, Saturn and Mars, bring challenges and struggle. But is it really that simple? What if the very things that we desire, like pleasure, ease, and expansion, can sometimes be what holds us back? In this video, we'll be exploring the darker side of Venus and Jupiter. What happens when their influence is left unchecked? How their energies can lead to self-sabotage? And most importantly, how to work with these planets in a productive way. We'll also be looking at the charts of some of history's most notorious figures to see how the benefic planets play a role in their rise and downfall. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Sophie. I make videos about astrology from an analytical, archetypal and psychological perspective. If you're like me and you're interested in astrology deep dives, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like a private reading with me, you can book through my website. Link is in the description below. In astrology, there are planets described as benefic and malefic. The benefic planets are Venus and Jupiter, and the malefic planets are Mars and Saturn. Jupiter, known as the greater benefic, and Venus, known as the lesser benefic, are often described as good-doing planets. In contrast, Mars and Saturn are known to be more difficult and the bad-doing planets. Venus, who's named after Aphrodite, the goddess of love, rules beauty, pleasure, luck, and relationships. And Jupiter, who's named after Zeus, the god of the sky, is the ruler of expansion, abundance, and good fortune. But there is so much more to these planets than meets the eye. To the ancient astrologers, benefic didn't simply mean good in a moral sense. It's simply a way to describe the planets that bring ease, cohesion, and flow. The word benefic originates from the Latin word beneficus, meaning generous, kind, or benevolent, and facere, meaning to do or to make. So you could say that the word benefic ultimately means well-meaning or good-intentioned. But just meaning well doesn't always guarantee a positive outcome. It can be like an attempt at goodness, but not a guaranteed result of goodness. As we know, ease isn't always beneficial, just as difficulty isn't always harmful. In fact, some of the most transformative experiences in life come from deep struggle, as well as some of the most destructive patterns coming from unchecked comfort. So before we explore some chart examples, let's dive deeper into Venus and Jupiter's dark side. Venus is the planet of pleasure, creativity, beauty, and relationships. She governs the things that we desire and are drawn to, whether it's people, art, luxury, or comfort. In a birth chart, Venus shows how we express our creativity and our affection, what we find attractive, and how we relate to others. Venus is most at home in the signs Taurus and Libra. In Taurus, she thrives in the physical world of indulgence, stability, and material pleasure. In Libra, she expresses herself through connection, diplomacy, and aesthetics. But just as there are positive aspects to her being at home in these signs, she can just as well become too attached to comfort, beauty, and external validation. Venus is exalted in Pisces, where she's lifted up into a dreamier, more connected space of artistic vision and transcendent beauty. But here she has the potential for idealism, illusion, fantasy, and self-sacrifice. Then we have Venus's signs of detriment, Aries and Scorpio. These signs are ruled by Mars, the planet of conflict, so her Venusian expression of love and peace is at odds in the home of the god of war. In Aries, Venus can sometimes struggle with things like diplomacy or patience, whereas in Scorpio, Venus can express a more dominant and emotionally intense quality. Lastly, Venus has her fall or depression in Virgo, where she loses her inclination for simple pleasures and becomes more practical and analytical, particularly towards aesthetics and love, encouraging strict perfectionism, sometimes at the cost of creative spontaneity. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, order, wisdom, belief systems, and growth. He governs the principles of elevation associated with leadership, faith, prosperity, and philosophy. Jupiter is most at home in the signs Sagittarius and Pisces. he thrives in the dynamic world of Sagittarius, where he expresses himself through freedom, expansion and adventure, and the dreamy world of Pisces, where he expresses himself through spirituality, compassion and artistic vision. But again, this doesn't automatically mean that Jupiter expresses only positive traits through these signs. Jupiter can also become too attached to dogma and idealism, as well as excess, grandiosity and self-destruction. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, where he's lifted up by Cancer's inclination to nurture and create. There's order in creation, and this agrees with Jupiter's expansive, unifying nature. But similarly, here he can also have an attachment to comfort, feelings of entitlement, or expressions of excessive need. Then we have Jupiter's signs of detriment, Gemini and Virgo. Both of these signs are ruled by Mercury, the planet of speed and communication. So here Jupiter can sometimes be scattered, unfocused, or overly analytical. In Gemini, Jupiter could express itself as more prideful or arrogant, whereas in Virgo, Jupiter could express a tendency to overanalyze, excessively worry, or cast judgment and criticism. Lastly, we have Jupiter in its fall or depression, which is the sign of Capricorn, where he's more inclined towards pessimism, restriction, materialism, and control. He becomes trapped in an over-reliance of bureaucracy, structure, and authority. Now that we've explored the nature of Venus and Jupiter and their potential shadows, let's take a look at some real-life examples. People whose charts reveal the darker manifestations of the Benefics. These examples will show how Venusian charm and Jupiterian expansion don't always result in positive outcomes. So let's start with one of the most infamous figures in history, Adolf Hitler. Hitler had Venus in her home sign of Taurus, a sign that values beauty, stability and ownership. Venus rules Taurus, so has access to all of her resources in this sign. But just because a planet is in its own domicile doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to express itself in positive ways all the time. Hitler's Venusian influence played out with his obsession with aesthetic order, whether in art or architecture, or even the rigid ideas of purity. Taurus is a sign that's deeply connected to material security and ownership, and Hitler took this to an extreme, treating entire nations as objects to be conquered and controlled. Additionally, he has Jupiter in Capricorn, which adds another layer. Jupiter, the planet of expansion, optimism, and belief, is in its fall or depression in Capricorn, meaning its usual qualities of wisdom and higher knowledge become restricted, pragmatic, and ambition-driven. Hitler's Jupiterian expansion wasn't about knowledge and philosophy. It was cold, methodical, and bureaucratic. He didn't take reckless risks. He built an entire ideological and governmental structure around his beliefs, carefully constructing his rise to power. In Hitler's case, the combination of Venusian aesthetic ideals and possession and Jupiterian rigid expansion resulted in one of history's most devastating regimes. Next, let's look at Jeffrey Epstein. His chart is another disturbing example of how Venus and Jupiter's blessings can be weaponized. Epstein had Venus in Pisces, which is her exaltation. Normally, this placement is associated with unconditional love, compassion, and artistic beauty. But exaltation means to be lifted up and placed on a pedestal. And in Epstein's case, it raises the question, was he lifted up by the elites? Or was he the one elevating others and providing them with the means for corruption? Venus in Pisces can be fluid, adaptable, and charming, but at its worst, it could be manipulative or deceptive. Epstein used his Venusian charm and connections to gain access to some of the most powerful people in the world, all while hiding in plain sight. His Jupiter in Taurus placement reinforces this. Taurus is the sign ruled by Venus, whereas Pisces is the sign ruled by Jupiter. So Epstein's Venus and Jupiter were mutually strengthening each other. Jupiter in Taurus expands material wealth, physical indulgence, and excess. He accumulated vast amounts of wealth and status, but it wasn't built on wisdom or higher knowledge. It was built on control, manipulation, and indulgence. This is Jupiter without any ethics, and expansion without any morality. It's the darker side of what happens when these planets work together in their shadow expressions. Next, let's look at Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes is another example of Venus and Jupiter manifesting themselves in their shadow expression. Holmes has both Venus and Jupiter in Capricorn. Venus in Capricorn can be strategic. Relationships and charm doesn't always have to be about romantic conquest. It can also be about social climbing and building status. Holmes carefully curated her image, using Venusian aesthetics to project credibility and legitimacy. She was known to wear a black turtleneck to mimic Steve Jobs, lowered her voice to sound more authoritative, and crafted a public persona that was ultimately a facade. Jupiter in Capricorn being in its fall amplifies the ambitious and driven mindset. In this instance, Jupiter doesn't expand through wisdom or higher ideals. It expands through control, manipulation, and relentless pursuit of power. Holmes promised groundbreaking technology that never existed, securing billions of dollars of investments based on a lie. This is Jupiterian excess in its most unethical form. Growth at any cost, regardless of the truth. Finally, let's look at David Koresh, who was known to be a Christian cult leader. His Venus in Virgo and Jupiter in Scorpio paints a fascinating picture of his ideology and influence. Venus in Virgo, being in its fall, struggles with typical Venusian themes. Instead, it becomes too rigid, analytical, and controlling. Koresh took this to an extreme. He dictated the relationships of his followers and imposed celibacy rules on them while keeping multiple wives for himself and distorting the idea of love into something entirely self-serving. Virgo is the sign of the Virgin, traditionally associated with purity, refinement, and chastity. Venus in Virgo could manifest as a desire to purify love. But in Koresh's case, this turned into a strict and hypocritical enforcement of sexual purity for his followers, whilst he himself engaged in numerous relationships. This is Venus operating from a place of control rather than connection, and restriction rather than harmony. By enforcing celibacy, he isolated his followers emotionally, ensuring their devotion to him alone. His Jupiter in Scorpio adds to this intensity. Jupiter expands whatever it touches. And in Scorpio, it expands themes of secrecy, power, and transformation. Koresh's teachings revolved around apocalyptic prophecy and his own supposed divinity. This is the shadow side of Jupiter, the belief in one's own messianic status, an unwavering faith that justifies any action, no matter how destructive. His followers believed him completely, demonstrating how Jupiter in Scorpio's power can be wielded to control others through fear and conviction. So, what can we learn from these examples? Venus and Jupiter are not good and bad planets. They simply show us what we're drawn to and where we seek expansion. When these energies are unchecked, it can lead to indulgence, manipulation, and unethical ambition. But when they're used consciously, they can bring beauty, wisdom, and true growth. The key here is not to fear the planets, but to understand how they operate in our lives and to work with them intentionally. So how do we work with these energies consciously without falling into their shadow expressions? The key is awareness, intention, and balance. Firstly, we need to recognize if Venus is leading us into complacency, avoidance, or superficiality. Is our pursuit of pleasure keeping us stuck in our comfort zones? Are we valuing appearances over substance? Are we avoiding necessary growth because it feels too uncomfortable? Learning to bring depth into our Venusian expression can help us cultivate true beauty, harmony, and love, rather than just keeping things at a surface level. With Jupiter, it's about expansion with wisdom. Growth for the sake of growth can lead to excess, overconfidence, and recklessness. Are we chasing big dreams without a plan? Are we justifying unethical behavior because we believe we're meant to succeed? True Jupiterian wisdom comes from knowing when to expand and when to pause, ensuring that our ambition is in alignment with integrity. By recognizing these patterns and making conscious choices, we can harness the best of Venus and Jupiter while avoiding their pitfalls, ensuring that their influence only serves our growth and doesn't work against us. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. I'd love to hear your thoughts. How have you experienced the dark side of Venus and Jupiter? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.